March 23rd, 1965, 8:47 p.m. The 28th Precinct, Harlem. The door opened. Bumpy Johnson walked in, 59 years old, dressed in an expensive suit. Black, tailored, perfect. Fedora hat, tilted just right. Walking cane, mahogany, silver handle. Behind him, 23 men. All in suites, all unarmed, all silent. The desk sergeant looked up. Recognition. Then, confusion. Then, fear. Officers in the station stopped what they were doing. Hands moved toward weapons. But Bumpy didn't reach for anything. He just walked to the center of the room, looked around, found a chair, sat down, crossed his legs, and waited. The 23 men behind him did the same. Found chairs, sat down, silent. The desk sergeant stood. "Mr. Johnson, what are you?" Bumpy raised one hand. Silence. Then he spoke. Voice calm, clear. No threat, just statement. "We're not leaving until you stop." The sergeant blinked. "Stop what?" "You know what." An officer moved closer, hand on his gun. "Sir, you need to leave. This is a police station." Bumpy smiled. Slight, knowing. "I'm aware. That's why we're here. You can't just sit here. Watch us." The captain came out of his office. Captain William Morrison, 48 years old, 22 years on the force, corrupt to his core. He looked at Bumpy. At the 23 men. At the situation. "Johnson, what the hell is this?" "A sit-in, Captain." "You're familiar with the concept?" "Dr. King's been using them quite successfully." Morrison's face went red. "You're comparing yourself to Martin Luther King?" "No. I'm using his tactics. Different cause, same method. Get out, now, or I'll have you all arrested." Bumpy didn't move, didn't blink. "For what? Sitting in a public building? I don't think that's illegal, Captain. In fact, I think Dr. King would say it's our constitutional right." Morrison realized something then. This wasn't a gang confrontation. This was something else entirely. Something he had no protocol for. A gangster using civil rights tactics. A criminal citing the Constitution. A sit-in. In a police station. Morrison reached for the phone. This was going to be a long night. And Bumpy Johnson wasn't going anywhere. To understand what happened on March 23rd, 1965, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson was at that moment. Not who he'd been, who he was. Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, 59 years old. Legend of Harlem. He'd just returned from Alcatraz 2 years earlier, served time for drug conspiracy, came back to find Harlem changed. Civil rights movement was everywhere. Protests, sit-ins, marches. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Change was in the air, but Harlem hadn't changed as much as the movement wanted. Black people still couldn't get bank loans, still couldn't get fair housing, still faced police brutality daily. The law was supposed to protect them. Instead, it oppressed them. Into that gap stepped Bumpy Johnson. Not a civil rights leader, a criminal, a gangster, a man who'd spent decades in and out of prison, but also a protector. According to biography.com, Bumpy controlled the numbers racket in Harlem, illegal gambling, policy banks, the underground lottery that kept the community's economy moving. But he did something different from other gangsters. He used that money to help people, paid rent for families facing eviction, sent kids to college, protected businesses from extortion by other gangs. To the FBI, he was public enemy. To Harlem, he was something else. The man who actually protected them when the police wouldn't. People called him the professor because he read constantly. Philosophy, history, strategy. They called him the Godfather because he controlled the underworld with intelligence, not just violence. By 1965, Bumpy was an institution. When he walked down Lenox Avenue, people greeted him like royalty, tipped their hats, nodded respect. Not because they feared him, because he'd earned their loyalty. But there was a problem. The police didn't like Bumpy Johnson, never had. Not because he was violent. He wasn't. Not anymore. Not because he was causing chaos. He wasn't. He kept order in Harlem better than they did. They didn't like him because he was independent, because he operated outside their control, because he represented an alternative power structure they couldn't dominate. So they did what corrupt systems do when they can't control something. They tried to destroy it. They created what became known as the Blacklist. And that's what brought Bumpy Johnson to that police station on March 23rd, 1965. Not to surrender, to resist. The Blacklist wasn't official. No written document. No formal policy. It was an understanding. An agreement among corrupt cops. A system of targeted harassment. Here's how it worked. Captain Morrison and his officers kept a list of businesses, people, and locations connected to Bumpy Johnson's operations. Not to arrest them, not to stop crime, to extort them. They'd raid policy banks without warning, confiscate money, never file charges, keep the cash. They'd harass business owners who worked with Bumpy. Fake violations. Health code. Fire code. Building code. Anything to shut them down or demand bribes. They'd arrest Bumpy's associates on trumped-up charges, hold them for 48 hours. No trial, no evidence, just harassment. The goal wasn't law enforcement. It was control. See, the police didn't want to stop the numbers game. They wanted to manage it. If they stopped it completely, they lost their source of bribes, lost their leverage, lost their power. But if they allowed it to run completely free, they lost control. So they created the Blacklist, a way to squeeze just enough to maintain dominance without killing the golden goose. Classic corruption, American style. According to blackpast.org, police corruption in Harlem during the 1,960 seconds was endemic. Officers routinely demanded protection money from illegal operations. But Bumpy Johnson had always refused to pay. Not because he couldn't afford it, because he wouldn't accept being controlled. So Captain Morrison escalated. January 1965. 3 policy banks raided in 1 week. $50,000 confiscated. 0 arrests. February 1965. 12 of Bumpy's associates arrested on suspicion. All released within 48 hours. No charges filed. March 1 to 20. 1965. 23 businesses on 125th Street received surprise inspections. 14 forced to close temporarily. All had connections to Bumpy. The message was clear. Pay up, or we'll destroy your operation piece by piece. But Bumpy still refused. Because paying Morrison meant accepting his authority. Meant admitting the police controlled Harlem. And Bumpy Johnson didn't accept that. So Morrison made a mistake. He pushed too far. March 22nd, 1965, 3:47 p.m. Morrison sent 12 officers to raid Mrs. Rosa Washington's restaurant on 132nd Street. Mrs. Washington was 72 years old. Widow. Owned that restaurant for 30 years. It was a policy bank. People placed numbers bets there. But it was also a legitimate business. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, community gathering place. The raid was brutal. Officers overturned tables, smashed dishes, threw food on the floor, arrested Mrs. Washington and her 2 employees, charged them with operating an illegal gambling establishment. But here's the thing. They didn't confiscate any betting slips, any evidence, any money, because it wasn't about law enforcement. It was about humiliation. Mrs. Washington was held for 6 hours. No phone call, no lawyer, just sitting in a cell at age 72, terrified. Finally released. No charges filed. By 9 p.m., word had reached Bumpy. He was at Small's Paradise, having dinner, when one of his associates rushed in. They got Mrs. Washington, tore up her place, arrested her. Bumpy's expression didn't change. He finished his meal, paid, tipped the waiter generously. Then he stood. Call everyone. Meeting at my place. 1 hour. His associates knew what that meant. War. But they expected guns, violence, retaliation. What Bumpy planned was something else entirely. At 10:15 p.m., 23 men gathered in Bumpy's apartment on 139th Street. His top associates, his most trusted people. They waited for orders, expected Bumpy to tell them which officers to target, how to hit back. Instead, Bumpy said something none of them expected. No guns, no violence. Tomorrow, we're going to the police station. Silence. Finally, one man spoke. Boss, to do what? To sit down and refuse to leave until they stop harassing our people. Another voice. That's suicide. They'll arrest us all. On what charge? Sitting in a chair? They'll find something. Let them try. In front of cameras. In front of reporters. In front of the whole city. Bumpy looked at each man. See, they expect violence. They want violence. Because they know how to handle violence. Guns they understand. Shootouts they can win. But this? A peaceful sit-in? Using the same tactics Dr. King uses? They have no idea how to handle that. Understanding dawned on their faces. You're using civil rights tactics. For the numbers game, I'm using civil rights tactics to stop police corruption. The numbers game is just the excuse they're using to abuse their power. This is about dignity, about refusing to accept their authority to terrorize our community. If Dr. King can sit in at a whites-only lunch counter, we can sit in at a police station that's supposed to serve everyone. One man laughed, nervous but amazed. Boss, you're crazy. Bumpy smiled. Maybe. But tomorrow at 8:30 p.m., we're going to find out if I'm crazy or brilliant. One rule, no weapons. Anyone brings a gun, they don't come. We're playing chess, not checkers. And in chess, sometimes the strongest move is the one your opponent doesn't see coming. March 23rd, 8:30 p.m. 24 men, including Bumpy, walked into the 28th precinct, unarmed, dressed in suits, ready to occupy, and everything changed. March 23rd, 1965, 8:47 p.m. 24 men sitting in the 28th precinct station. Silent. Still. Waiting. Captain Morrison stood in the center of the room. Officers surrounding him. Hands on weapons. But nobody drew. Nobody fired. Because what do you do when a man sits down and refuses to move? Shoot him? For sitting? Arrest him? For what? Morrison tried intimidation first. Johnson, I'm giving you one last chance. Leave now, or face the consequences. Bumpy didn't look up. Just sat there, calm, hands folded on his walking cane. What consequences, Captain? You going to arrest me for sitting? I'd be interested to see that charge sheet. Trespassing. This is a public building. I'm a citizen. I have a right to be here. You're disrupting police business. I'm sitting quietly. How is that disruptive? Morrison's jaw tightened. He turned to his officers. Get them out. Physically remove them if necessary. 4 officers moved forward, grabbed the first of Bumpy's men, tried to drag him from his chair. The man went limp. Dead weight. Classic civil disobedience technique. The officers struggled, managed to drag him toward the door. But the instant they let go to open the door, the man walked back to his chair, sat down again. Morrison's face went red. "Arrest him! Resisting police orders!" "On what charge?" Bumpy's voice. Still calm. He walked back to a chair. "That's not resisting. That's exercising his right to occupy a public space." Morrison realized the trap. If he arrested them, he'd have to explain why. In court. 24 black men arrested for sitting in a police station. Headlines wrote themselves. And this was 1,965. Civil rights movement at its peak. Every arrest of peaceful protesters made national news. Morrison couldn't afford that kind of attention, so he tried a different approach. "Fine. Sit there. You'll get tired. You'll get hungry. You'll leave eventually." Bumpy smiled. Slight. Knowing. "Captain, I spent 5 years in Alcatraz. I can sit in uncomfortable chairs for a very long time. And my men? They're prepared to stay here as long as it takes." "As long as what takes?" "As long as it takes for you to stop the harassment." "I don't know what you're talking about." Bumpy reached into his jacket. Slowly, visibly, no sudden movements. Pulled out a piece of paper. "This is a list. 23 businesses raided in the past 2 months. 0 arrests. 0 charges filed. $50,000 confiscated. $0 returned. This is a list of 12 of my associates arrested on suspicion. All released within 48 hours. 0 charges filed. And this morning, you arrested Mrs. Rosa Washington, 72 years old, for 6 hours. 0 charges filed. That's a pattern, Captain. And we both know what it means." Morrison said nothing. "So here's what's going to happen," Bumpy continued. Voice still calm, but now with an edge. "We're going to sit here, peacefully, quietly. No violence, no threats. And you're going to stop harassing the businesses and people on this list. When you agree to that, we leave. Until then, we stay." Morrison laughed. Bitter. "You think you can occupy a police station? We'll starve you out." One of Bumpy's men reached into a bag, pulled out sandwiches, thermoses of coffee. Bumpy smiled. "We brought provisions." Another man pulled out a newspaper, started reading. Another pulled out a book. They were settling in. Morrison understood then. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't theater. Bumpy Johnson was serious. He was going to sit in that police station until Morrison blinked. And Morrison had no idea how to make him leave. At 9:15 p.m., Morrison retreated to his office, called his supervisor, Deputy Inspector Robert Matthews. "Sir, we have a situation." "What kind of situation?" "Bumpy Johnson and 23 of his men are sitting in my station, refusing to leave." Silence on the other end. Then, "Sitting?" "Yes, sir." "Not shooting? Not threatening? Just sitting?" "Yes, sir." More silence. "Can you arrest them?" "For what?" "Sitting? Trespassing?" "It's a public building, sir, and they're not doing anything illegal. If we arrest them, it's going to look like we're arresting peaceful protesters. This is 1,965, sir. Civil rights. If this gets out..." "I know what year it is, Morrison. Give me an hour. I'll figure something out." Morrison hung up, walked back to the main room. Bumpy was still sitting, reading a newspaper now. The New York Times. His men were talking quietly, eating sandwiches, drinking coffee, like they were at a picnic, not a police station. Morrison sat at his desk, stared at them. This was going to be a long night, and he had no idea how to win. March 23rd, 1965, 11:32 p.m., 3 hours into the sit-in. The police station had gone quiet. Officers didn't know what to do, so they did nothing, just watched, waited. Bumpy and his men sat, patient, silent when necessary, talking quietly when not. At midnight, Captain Morrison walked over to Bumpy, pulled up a chair, sat across from him. "Off the record, Johnson. What do you really want?" Bumpy looked up from his newspaper. "I told you. Stop the harassment. The raids are legal. The raids are theft. You take money. File no charges. Keep the cash. That's not law enforcement. That's robbery with a badge." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Careful what you're accusing me of." "I'm not accusing. I'm stating facts. You raided Mrs. Washington's restaurant. Arrested a 72-year-old woman. Held her 6 hours. No charges. Why? She was running an illegal gambling operation. Then why no charges? Why no evidence confiscated? Why release her?" Morrison had no answer. Bumpy leaned forward. "You know what the difference is between you and me, Captain? Enlighten me. We're both criminals, but I'm honest about it. I run illegal gambling. I don't pretend it's legitimate. I don't hide behind a badge. You take bribes. You extort business owners. You abuse your power. But you call it law enforcement. That makes you worse than me. Because at least I'm not a hypocrite." Morrison's face went red. He stood. "You're pushing your luck, Johnson." "Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, you're the one with a problem. I can sit here for days. Can you explain to your superiors why 24 men are occupying your police station? Can you explain to the newspapers why you can't make them leave? Can you explain to the city why you're holding peaceful protesters?" Morrison said nothing. Bumpy continued, voice quiet now, almost gentle. "You're in a trap, Captain, and you put yourself there. If you use force, you're the villain. 24 unarmed black men brutalized by police. If you arrest us, you have to charge us. And your charges won't hold. Sitting isn't a crime. If you do nothing, we stay. And every hour we're here, you look weaker. Your only option is to negotiate. And you know it." Morrison stared at Bumpy, hatred in his eyes, but also respect. This man had checkmated him without throwing a punch. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Bumpy pulled out the list again. "Stop raiding these businesses without cause. If you have evidence of illegal activity, file charges. Follow the law. Do your job properly. Stop arresting people on suspicion and holding them for days without charges. That's unconstitutional. Stop confiscating money without filing evidence. That's theft. Do those 3 things, and we leave tonight." Morrison took the list. "Read it." Every business on it was connected to Bumpy's operations. Policy banks, numbers, runners, fronts. If he agreed, he'd be giving Bumpy free rein to operate. But if he didn't agree, this sit-in could last days, and eventually someone would call the press. Morrison looked at Bumpy. "You're asking me to let you run your operation without interference. I'm asking you to enforce the law fairly. If you have evidence, arrest us. If you don't, leave us alone. That's not protection. That's justice." Morrison stood, walked back to his office, slammed the door. At 1:47 a.m., Deputy Inspector Matthews arrived, walked into Morrison's office. Door closed. Bumpy couldn't hear the conversation, but he could imagine it. Matthews was smarter than Morrison, more political. He understood optics, understood public relations. He understood that this sit-in was a disaster waiting to happen. At 2:15 a.m., Matthews came out of Morrison's office, walked over to Bumpy. "Mr. Johnson, can we talk privately?" Bumpy nodded, stood, followed Matthews to an interrogation room. They sat across from each other. Matthews spoke first. "I'm not going to insult your intelligence by pretending I don't know what's happening here." "Good. I appreciate honesty. You want us to stop targeting your operations. I want you to stop breaking the law while enforcing it." Matthews smiled. Thin, professional, clever, using civil rights language. Makes it hard for us to refuse without looking like Bull Connor. That's the idea. But you understand our position. You run illegal operations. We're supposed to stop you. Then stop me legally. Get a warrant. Gather evidence. Arrest me. Charge me. Take me to trial. That's how the system is supposed to work. What Captain Morrison is doing, raiding without warrants, confiscating without evidence, arresting without charges, that's not law enforcement. That's tyranny. Matthews was quiet for a long moment. Then, what if we make a deal? I'm listening. We stop the harassment. No more raids without proper warrants. No more arrests without charges. In exchange, you keep things quiet. No more sit-ins. No media. No public embarrassment. Bumpy considered. That's what you're really worried about, isn't it? Not the gambling. The embarrassment. We can't have criminals occupying police stations, Mr. Johnson. It sets a precedent. Then don't give criminals a reason to. Matthews stood. I'll talk to Morrison. If he agrees to new protocols, proper warrants, proper procedures, will you leave tonight? Bumpy stood as well. On one condition, Mrs. Washington's restaurant. You return the money you took. You apologize. And you never raid her place again without evidence. That's 3 conditions. Take it or leave it. Matthews extended his hand. Deal. They shook. At 2:47 a.m., Bumpy Johnson and his 23 men walked out of the 28th Precinct. They'd occupied it for 6 hours. Not a shot fired. Not a punch thrown. But they'd won. Here's what Bumpy Johnson understood that Captain Morrison didn't. Power in 1965. America didn't just come from guns or badges. It came from perception, from narrative, from who controlled the story. And Bumpy knew how to control the story. March 24th, 1965. 7:30 a.m. The New York Amsterdam News, Harlem's black newspaper, received an anonymous tip. Bumpy Johnson led a peaceful protest at the 28th Precinct last night. Police corruption, harassment of black businesses. Sit-in lasted 6 hours. By 9 a.m., a reporter was at Bumpy's apartment. Bumpy granted an interview, but he was careful. Very careful. He didn't talk about the numbers game, didn't mention illegal gambling, didn't admit to any crimes. He talked about civil rights. The police have been targeting black-owned businesses in Harlem for months. Raids without warrants, arrests without charges, money confiscated without evidence. We tried going through proper channels, filed complaints. Nothing happened. So we used the same tactic Dr. King uses: peaceful protest, civil disobedience. We sat in that police station for 6 hours, unarmed, nonviolent, demanding our constitutional rights. The reporter asked, "But Mr. Johnson, aren't some of those businesses involved in illegal gambling?" Bumpy smiled. "If they are, then the police should gather evidence and file charges. That's how the law works. What they can't do is raid businesses without warrants and confiscate money without filing charges. That's theft, not law enforcement. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for equal treatment under the law." Perfect. Soundbite. The article ran March 25th. Front page. Headline: Harlem leader stages sit-in at police station to protest corruption. Halajol 251. The article carefully avoided mentioning Bumpy's criminal background, focused on police misconduct, made it sound like a legitimate civil rights protest, which, in a way, it was. Within days, other newspapers picked up the story. The New York Times ran a piece. Questions raised about police tactics in Harlem. The Daily News. Corruption allegations at 28th Precinct. City Councilman Charles Rangel, representing Harlem, called for an investigation. Community leaders held a press conference supporting Bumpy's protest. The NYPD was on the defensive. They couldn't admit that Morrison had been running an extortion racket, but they couldn't deny that raids had happened without proper procedures. So they did what bureaucracies do when caught. They restructured. April 2nd, 1965. Captain William Morrison transferred. Promoted to a desk job in Queens. Effective immediately. New captain appointed to the 28th Precinct. Captain James Howard, black. From the community. Clean record. New protocols announced. All raids require proper warrants signed by a judge. All confiscated money must be logged as evidence. All arrests must result in formal charges within 24 hours or release. The NYPD framed it as modernization, better procedures, community policing. In reality, it was surrender. Bumpy Johnson had forced the most powerful police department in America to change its policies. With a sit-in, no guns, no violence, just strategy. But here's what the newspapers didn't report. The cost. Because Bumpy had won the battle. But he'd made powerful enemies. The NYPD didn't forget. Didn't forgive. They just changed tactics. If they couldn't arrest Bumpy on local charges, they'd find another way. 3 weeks after the sit-in, FBI agents appeared in Harlem, starting asking questions about Bumpy Johnson. Federal investigations, federal charges, federal prison. The local police couldn't touch him, so they called in the big guns. Bumpy knew this would happen. He'd calculated the cost. But he did it anyway, because some battles are worth fighting even when you know you'll pay the price later. March 25th, 1965, 9:47 a.m. Bumpy Johnson sat in his apartment reading the Amsterdam News article. His associate, Frank Lucas, sat across from him. "Boss, we won. Morrison's gone. Raid stopped. We beat them." Bumpy didn't look up from the paper. "We won a battle, Frank. Not the war." "What do you mean?" Bumpy folded the newspaper, looked at Frank. "The FBI will be here within a month. You watch. We didn't break any federal laws. Doesn't matter. We embarrassed the NYPD, made them look weak. They'll call in favors. Federal agents will start investigating everything. Tax evasion, interstate commerce, conspiracy. They'll find something. Or create something. That's the cost of winning publicly." Frank was quiet. "Then why did we do it?" Bumpy stood, walked to the window, looked out at Harlem. "Because Mrs. Washington is 72 years old. She doesn't deserve to be dragged into a police station and humiliated. Because those 23 businesses were being bled dry by corrupt cops. Because someone had to stand up. And if not me, then who? I've been a criminal for 40 years, Frank. I've hurt people. I've broken laws. I'm not a hero, but I can still do the right thing occasionally. Even if it costs me." Frank nodded slowly, understanding. "What happens now?" "Now we prepare. Lawyers, accountants. We make sure our books are clean. We make sure we can survive the federal investigation. And we keep operating, but smarter, quieter. That sit-in bought us breathing room. Morrison's gone. The new captain will follow procedures. We can operate without constant harassment. For now." Bumpy turned from the window. "But the clock is ticking. And eventually, they'll come for me again. That's the game, Frank. You win some battles. You lose some." 3 months later, June 1965, FBI agents raided 5 of Bumpy's operations simultaneously. Federal charges. Operating an illegal gambling enterprise across state lines. The investigation lasted 2 years. Bumpy hired the best lawyers, fought every charge, delayed every trial. He was never convicted on the federal charges. But the investigations drained his resources, cost him hundreds of thousands in legal fees. The FBI never proved their case. But they didn't need to. The goal wasn't conviction, it was disruption. And in that, they succeeded. But here's what they couldn't disrupt: the precedent Bumpy set. After March 1965, police tactics in Harlem changed. Not because the NYPD suddenly became ethical, but because Bumpy proved that even the powerless have power when they organize, that even criminals can demand constitutional rights, that peaceful protest works even when led by a gangster. Community leaders started using the same tactics: sit-ins, peaceful protests, media pressure, not for criminal operations, for legitimate grievances, police brutality, housing discrimination, school segregation. Bumpy had shown them the playbook. And Harlem paid attention. Bumpy Johnson died July 7th, 1968. Heart attack, age 62. 3 years after the sit-in at the 28th Precinct. He never went back to federal prison. Fought off the charges. Died a free man. His funeral was attended by thousands. Politicians, community leaders, business owners, and police officers, including Captain James Howard, the man who replaced Morrison. Howard placed a wreath at the funeral. When asked why, he said, "Bumpy Johnson was a criminal, but he was also the man who forced us to do our jobs properly. He shouldn't have needed to, but he did. And for that, he deserves respect." That's Bumpy's legacy from March 1965. Not that he beat the police, but that he forced them to follow their own rules. Not that he won, but that he showed others how to fight. Not that he was a hero, but that he did a heroic thing when it mattered. The sit-in at the 28th Precinct lasted 6 hours. Its impact lasted generations. March 23rd, 1965, 8:47 p.m. Bumpy Johnson walked into a police station. 23 men behind him. No guns, no threats, no violence. Just the power of refusing to move until justice was served. 6 hours later, he walked out victorious. This is the story of how a gangster used the tactics of Martin Luther King Jr. to defeat police corruption, how a criminal demanded constitutional rights and got them, how peaceful protest proved more powerful than bullets. But it's also the story of something bigger. It's about what happens when the system is so broken that criminals have to fight for justice, when the police are so corrupt that gangsters become protectors, when the law is so unjust that breaking it becomes a form of resistance. Bumpy Johnson shouldn't have needed to occupy a police station. The police should have followed their own rules, should have protected the community instead of exploiting it. But they didn't. So Bumpy did what he had to do. He borrowed tactics from the civil rights movement, applied them to the criminal underworld, and forced change. Was he a hero? No. Was he a criminal? Yes. But was he right to do what he did? That's the question we still debate today. Because Bumpy's sit-in reveals an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the people breaking the law are more just than the people enforcing it. Sometimes criminals demand rights that should have been given freely. Sometimes the system is so broken that the only way to fix it is to break it further. Bumpy Johnson understood this. He understood that power doesn't always come from guns or badges. Sometimes it comes from refusing to move, from sitting down and saying no more, from forcing people to see injustice by making it impossible to ignore. That's what happened on March 23rd, 1965. A gangster became an activist. A police station became a protest site. And Harlem learned that even the powerless can win if they're smart enough, brave enough, and stubborn enough to refuse to lose. If this story changed how you think about power and resistance, hit that subscribe button. We're telling the stories history complicated, the ones that don't fit easy narratives. Drop a comment. If you were Bumpy, would you have used violence or protest? Would you have fought with guns or with principles? Hit the like button if you think Bumpy Johnson was right to use civil rights tactics for criminal operations. Turn on notifications because next week we're revealing another untold story from Harlem. The time Bumpy Johnson saved Malcolm X's life. The protection detail that lasted 2 years. The friendship between a gangster and a revolutionary. You won't want to miss it. Remember, March 23rd, 1965. A gangster walked into a police station and refused to leave until justice was served. No guns, no violence. Just the power of saying, no more. That's not criminal behavior. That's revolutionary behavior. And sometimes, in a broken system, the two are the same. Rest in power, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the man who proved that even criminals deserve constitutional rights, and that sometimes breaking the law is the most American thing you can do. This is Harlem Chronicles, telling the stories they don't want you to know, the complicated ones, the true ones. We'll see you in the next one.